let me set the scene. The year is 1941. World War II is in session. The Scapa Flow, crucial real estate in wartime, is going to be the MacGuffin for our story. Currently, the British controls the Scapa Flow. This is the one thing keeping them alive. The problem is, they are surrounded by enemies eager to take it. The U.S.'s supply ships and the German warships are battling it out near these waters.
The most memorable story of the battles for the Scapa Flow is the story of the Bismarck. It was sent out in August 1940, but was bottled up in the Baltic.
The Bismarck was the pride of Germany. It was a great ship and a huge political statement. You see, the construction of ships was restricted by agreements from both sides of the war. A lot of them were broken. The Germans, well, they took pride in it, showed off their power.
Like we take pride in today's Blue Angels.
It was time for the Bismarck's fatal mission.
The Bismarck was ready to break out of the Baltic. Its sights were on the Atlantic,
where it could weaken the U.S.'s supply chain to the British,
which would weaken the Scapa Flow,
leaving it vulnerable
to attack.
And without the Scapa Flow,
the British were out of the war. The story of the Bismarck is about a huge turning point in the war. The Axis prepared for a triumphant defeat of the British.
The Allies prepared to prevent that, a tragedy in their eyes.
And in the end, the gears of the war would shift, all because of one ship, the Bismarck. At 1500, 2 large warships, escorted by 3 destroyers, 5 ships, and 10 or 12 planes, passed to the northeast. The ships are German, and the hunt is on.
The Bismarck was fleeing the Baltic.
There was no time. The Allies received that frantic message on the 27th of May and gathered their forces.
Things then spiraled into some kind of boring tactical plans where the Allies would attack and then they'd retreat into darkness as the Bismarck would point its guns at it and try to shoot, repeating over and over again until finally, the Allies had to pull out the big guns.
The Hood and the Prince of Wales.
The Hood was the pride of the Royal Navy. It was a mighty ship and, like the Bismarck, symbolic to its people, the British.
The Prince of Wales was a new ship, but, although amazing, had guns that would short-circuit under strain.
They were standing there, expecting to triumphantly shut down the Bismarck right there.
The battle lasted a little over a quarter of an hour. The Hood begins to shoot at the ship in front, assuming it's the Bismarck.
It's not. It's the one destroyer accompanying the Bismarck, the Prince Eugen.
After minutes of trading missing blows, the Bismarck finds her mark. She hits the magazine locker, causing a huge explosion.
Soon, the Hood sank.
At the end of the battle, the Prince of Wales was retreating, badly damaged. The Bismarck was hardly touched, and the Prince Eugen wasn't even hit.
Out of the 1,141 people on board the Hood, 3 survive. What's worse, the Bismarck was freed to the Atlantic. One last desperate call went out, flooding the airways for a short moment. It simply said, "Sink the Bismarck." One desperate call to stop the ship from escaping.
No one could stop it from reaching the sea. It was a tragic day in history.
But perhaps not all was lost. So what do you do when you have a deadly battleship on the list that wants to take one of the most important ports, the Scapa Flow, in the war? Oh, you track it down.
Luckily, the Allies had some luck on their side. You see, one of the shells from the Prince of Wales had found its mark. The Bismarck was leaking oil.
Although this was a tragedy for ocean life,
It meant that the Allies had the Bismarck's trail. With that in their radars, the Allies had the Bismarck in their sights. All they had to do was wait for reinforcements. Plus, while they were waiting, they could hit the Bismarck with bombing runs. Things were looking up.
until they lost it. Eventually, the Bismarck escaped. Now it was loose in the Atlantic. What ensued was national panic. No one knew where the Bismarck was headed. However, by some stroke of luck, with all the methods being used, it is found out that the Bismarck is headed to France. There's only one problem. A mathematical error is made and the Navy starts heading to Norway. However, another stroke of luck is made. Intercepting codes, someone finds a message. It's a mom asking if her son is okay after the battle with the Hood and Prince of Wales. The response says that everyone on the Bismarck is safe and accounted for, and that the Bismarck is headed to Brest, France. There was still time for one final confrontation. This would be the final stand. Tensions were high. Maybe, just maybe, the Allies would finally be able to sink the Bismarck. Ships wouldn't make it in time. It was time for a final desperate bombing run. The planes were sent out. These were obsolete planes. They were slow, had weak armor, and couldn't fly as high. But somehow, this helped them.
You see, the low flying messed up the cannons. The low speed meant that the anti-aircraft artillery shot too far ahead of the planes. And the poor armor meant that the Bismarck shells wouldn't detonate.
Even with these advantages, the planes couldn't hit the Bismarck. One final torpedo was shot, but the Bismarck dodged and made an evasive turn
It kept turning,
away from its destination.
and it kept turning.
The Bismarck was going in circles.
You see, one of the torpedoes had hit the Bismarck's rudder. This knocked out its steering.
The ships came and sank it soon. At daybreak, they released shells that erupted across the Bismarck, destroying all four main guns. Many lives were lost. The people on the ships, pitying the Bismarck's crew, started pulling them out of the water.
However, the ships had to flee, with many people still waiting in the water when they spot a U-boat.
It is a tragedy for those people, but it was a turning point in the war.
You see, this was when Hitler gave up on Navy forces. They were costly and too public.
Now, Hitler was setting his sights elsewhere.
The Soviet Union.
But that's a whole nother story. For now, we can remember the triumphant story of the sinking of the Bismarck.
And respect the tragic sacrifice with it.
But you already know that's just how war is.
There's always tragedy in triumph.
And there's always triumph in tragedy.